Hello and welcome to the week ahead from the Financial Times in London. Here are some of the big stories we'll be watching this week. Historic talks between the US and North Korea will take place when Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un meet in Singapore. The Federal Reserve is expected to raise interest rates in the US. The owner of the Zara fashion brand Inditex reports results. And the Football World Cup kicks off in Russia, but will FIFA vote for an underdog to host the 2026 tournament? Now, just a year ago, Kim Jong-un was a pariah. North Korea had conducted several missile tests, and US President Donald Trump threatened to respond with fire and fury. Until March, the North Korean dictator had never even been abroad on a state visit. But this year, things have switched to a more diplomatic track, and on Tuesday, he's due to meet Donald Trump in a historic summit. Mr. Trump wants to sign an agreement to denuclearize North Korea and set a new path for the reclusive regime. But what is the US likely to get out of this week's meeting? Here's our chief foreign affairs commentator, Gideon Rachman.
These are two very unusual and unpredictable leaders. If you had two kind of normal leaders, it would be quite easy, I think, to sketch out the possible outcomes. It would be very hard to imagine that they would immediately solve the problem or come up with a breakthrough. With these leaders, it's possible that they will stray off script quite sharply and perhaps come up with something that surprises us all. But there's also a downside risk. And if the two men don't hit it off, or if they have very different expectations, you could actually see a summit that goes badly wrong and leads to a return or even perhaps an increase in the concerns about war that so dominated 2017.
And now to the US, where the Federal Reserve's monetary policy decision is the highlight of a busy economic calendar this week. We'll get updates on inflation, manufacturing and consumer sentiment in Thursday's retail sales report. The interest rate decision, which is on Wednesday, will be presented alongside updates to the Fed's economic and interest rate projections. That will be followed by a press conference with Fed Chair Jay Powell. A rate rise is largely considered a foregone conclusion, as our reporter Mamta Badkar explains.
Markets are anticipating the second rate rise of the year and the seventh since 2015 amid signs of renewed strength in the US economy and as the Fed is getting a bit more confident about its inflation outlook. Now, the Fed said last month that inflation has moved closer to its 2% target, but noted that this is a symmetrical target, suggesting that modest moves above or below 2% will be acceptable to the Fed. Of note, of course, will be the dot plot of interest rate projections as markets try to determine whether 2018 has 3 or 4 rate rises on the cards.
Now to Spain, where Inditex, the owner of the Zara fashion brand, is set to report its first quarter results. And all eyes will be on the long troublesome gross margin figure. The world's largest clothes retailer by sales has for years seen slipping margins. This has sparked investor concerns about the effect of competition from online-only rivals. And in March, the company said that gross margins had dropped from 57% in 2016 to 56.3% in 2017. That was the lowest for a decade and worse than analyst expectations. But many analysts are saying that while gross margins may be down in the first quarter, there could be signs of stabilisation, which would reassure the markets. Inditex has long denied that online sales were leading to lower margins. Earlier this year, it blamed the strong euro as well as unseasonal weather. And finally, to Russia, where the Football World Cup kicks off on Thursday. The hosts take on Saudi Arabia in the opening match in Moscow. But just before the big kick-off, more than 200 of FIFA's member nations will meet to vote on the hosts for the 2026 World Cup. And it's a race between a powerhouse joint bid by the United States, Canada and Mexico, and an underdog bid by Morocco. Much to the surprise of many people in the world of football, Morocco could win it. This would be a shock because the North American bid is offering a projected record $11 billion of profits to FIFA. And FIFA's own inspection task force scored the North American bid very highly on technical merit, and it said there were risks to hosting the tournament in Morocco. So, what would it mean if Morocco pulls off a surprise victory? Here's our leisure correspondent, Murad Ahmed.
It seemed to me, at least, by reading that report, that FIFA's inspectors were saying don't hold the World Cup in Morocco, at least in comparison to the North American bid. So what would it say if Morocco still won? It would tell you that the political horse trading of the past that has mired old World Cup votes has not disappeared, regardless of all the reforms that FIFA have put in place. And weirdly enough, a counterpoint, money isn't everything. That in the end, the global image that you set out has a big part to play when it comes to voting on these essentially popularity contests.
And that's what the week ahead looks like from the Financial Times in London. See you again next time.